Okay. So the focus of this presentation, I want it to be on why our mission and vision require a unique integrated design approach to courses and programs. So let me just kind of start with our vision, that we're reinventing Christian higher education to make it affordable, sorry, um, radically affordable and relevant to the needs of those serving the poor and the addicted. Our goal is to be twice as relevant at half the cost of comparable options. Now, there's a lot of ways to get to that. One is we could just do half the cost because we pay you half as much. We could do half the cost by making you work twice as hard as everyone else. That's not what we're trying to do. Right. So there's ways to kind of re-engineer the system, and that's ultimately what we're trying to do. So um, one of the areas of expertise I have is in, organizational design, organizational theory, and I'm working on a course that, really focuses on this. This is actually a talk that I gave at the last Citygate conference. But if you look at, kind of organizations, what happens, they have startup, they have growth, they have maturity, and then they go into decline. And to use some terminology we use in other courses, they go into decline whenever their theological vision and their strategy become misaligned with their context and audience. So for the most part, I think most people can agree that traditional system of higher education, and that also means traditional system of Christian higher education, is somewhat in decline. Um, but whether or not you agree with that, you could say, okay, it's in the maturity stage. There's the traditional system of Christian higher education for those serving the poor and the addicted. Now, a lot of the Christian organization or Christian universities that decided to serve this audience, they developed urban ministry programs like 40 years ago, and those programs were highly affordable. They were in cities. Now, most of those programs, the tuition, I was just looking at one school, $85,000 a year, and they say they're focused on serving the poor and the addicted. I'm like, no, that's not the poor and the addicted anymore. So, and no one's ever going to serve the poor and the addicted if that's what your tuition is, right? So this system's broken. So in organization design, and I have an oversimplified diagram, but this is basically what you get in organization design, is you have to match your context and audience with all your systems. So this is your strategy. And you got your programs, you got your funding model, you got your systems and policies, you got your culture and staff. And in the middle, you have this thing called theological vision if you're a Christian organization, or you could just call it, kind of values and vision, mission, values, and vision. Um, so what happens is these things get misaligned and then you have a decline, right? So you can see that with denominations, you can see that with, all sorts of organizations. So what the opportunity is given the new environment, culture, and technology, how do we create a new system for Christian higher education to train Christians serving the poor and the addicted that is radically more affordable, relevant, and greatly expands access? So what really needs to happen is an end-to-end redesign of this to get it to better align. Does that make sense for people? Now, for Evan and Charlie, you guys have been a part of this. Hopefully, what this is going to be, where I've talked about components of this, this will be another layer of the onion of kind of solidifying this. The other thing I want you to share at the end is maybe how you've seen this to be true, because it's one thing to talk about this pie in the sky 30,000-foot level of, okay, here's why our strategy is the way it is. It's another thing that, Charlie, you've lived it for the past several years, and you're like, okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Evan, you've lived it since 2007. So we're not just making this up, and maybe you guys can fill in some of the details on that. So, and we use something called the lean startup process for learning and optimizing in this new environment, because if you're creating a new system, you have to it's an organic system. You have to use a lean startup process to do that. So, in the Bible, Jesus said, no one puts new wine in old wineskins. And, the term disruptive innovation is really basically saying the same thing. You shouldn't put new wine or technology into old systems. So what happens is whenever you have a new revolutionary technology, there has to be new end-to-end system redesign. So the transition from electrification, people talk about how Henry Ford, revolutionized, and, he called it democratizing, the automobile, right? Well, all he did was apply he redesigned the system of a factory based on the fact that electricity was available. And he did an end-to-end redesign, and it reduced costs probably by a factor of 10. The same type of thing, and this is easier to imagine. So moving from trains to automobiles and trucks, okay, what is the end-to-end redesign? Well, you had to have gas stations, you had to have freeways, you had to have repair shops, oil refineries, part stores, truck drivers, oil companies, auto manufacturers. That's an end-to-end redesign, right? We're going through that right now with the computer, the internet, and digital technologies. So the systems are still being redesigned. Depending on where you want to do the start date, we're probably 20 or 30 years into that. And I think typically it takes about 50 years for things to happen. SpaceX, they did an end-to-end redesign based on current tech of how do you launch rockets. So what we're trying to do is what's the end-to-end system redesign needed based on the new capabilities of online education. So let me use another example of what that looks like visually. So steam-powered factories used to have a single motor, like if you were based on a windmill or a water mill, what is that? Um, you had one motor, and then you had to have every thing connected to that one motor through, systems of pulleys. So what Ford did is he said that doesn't make sense. We shouldn't be organizing factories all according to where you need to have the pulleys. You need to organize it based on what's the most efficient way to get cars done. And he did things a lot of different components of this, but he did a end-to-end redesign. Now, the same thing happened with SpaceX, and I know this is kind of a nerdy diagram, but this is the cost per kilogram of rockets. Like, and these are all the different, rockets. And the cost basically was around whatever this is, probably about $10,000 per kilogram. And then SpaceX came and they said all these things that, and if you read Elon Musk's biography, you get a, feel for this. All these things that are just assumptions of how we have to design rockets. So we got to use an O-ring that costs $250,000 rather than using the same O-ring from a car that costs $10 as an example. And they just did tests on all these things, and then they figured out ways to redesign the whole thing, and they reduced the cost of putting stuff into space by a factor of 10. And so hold on. I think Jeff's trying to join. I'm going to let me just pause this. Actually. All right, I'm going to keep going since I'm recording. All right, so kind of the question is, why does there need to be an end-to-end system redesign? The foundational structure and assumptions have changed in ways that change the whole system, and the new system needs to be optimized around its strengths. And there's a unique opportunity to radically reduce costs and expand access by optimizing the end-to-end efficiency. So, and there's also a unique opportunity to greatly improve relevance by focusing on a market niche. So, I use the example of the Saturday Night Live skit. I don't know if you guys ever saw it, of the spatula store. And all they have is they have a warehouse, and all they sell is spatulas. So for us, all that we want to do is we want to serve Christians that serve the poor and the addicted. And we want to do that really well. So, it's not quite as much of a niche as having a spatula superstore. But we're kind of focused on a niche, and by focusing on that small niche, we're able to do that well. So here's some of the systemic differences of online education. If I had to say, what stage are we in? We're in the stage of online education where the factories are still designed the way they used to be designed before. So if you go to most universities, online education costs the same, or in some cases actually more, or maybe slightly less than campus-based education. And that's because the factories, or whatever the systems, designed the way it used to be. So the paradigm, industrial economy versus knowledge economy, student context in person versus online digital, strengths, personal transformation is the strength of traditional education, accessibility and affordability. The market is national and global, and especially in these things that are red, I'm saying these are really things that a lot of organizations haven't adapted to. Um, Most Christian higher education hasn't adapted to. The market condition, it's consolidations, economies of scale. Part of what we're trying to do is, I think 80% of the market is going to be owned by 10 players. And how do you survive in a space where 80% of the market's going to be owned by 10 players? Well, you have your niche and you sell spatulas and you sell spatulas better than anyone else in the world. And that's how you survive whenever, that consolidation. Teaching was a custom craft and it was very difficult. Um, so, like each craftsperson's creating their own chair versus standardized. And, the term that's used in this field is called de-skilled. Course design is a custom craft. Course design for us, I feel like it's more important than difficult. And I'll talk about that. The faculty model, faculty is custom craftspeople. The faculty model is split between two groups, standardized masses, that's de-skilled, and then specialized leadership. So you guys are kind of in the specialized leadership category. Best faculty are a subject matter expert, and the core competency is you're good at public speaking. Here it's subject matter expert with tech plus ed theory plus design. Design philosophy integrated. And here it's either modular or integrated. And I'll talk about that. But if it's a plain vanilla course, it needs to be modular. A lot of our courses that are kind of core signature courses, they have to be integrated. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. The org mission, a lot of universities, the reason why they're so expensive is they have like 4 different mission statements, to be honest. So they're too broad, whereas we're specialized. And the organization core competency, really, at most universities, it's faculty recruitment and management. Whereas I feel like for us, it's the design of the end-to-end student experience. We want the students to have a good experience. The work environment, common offices, mostly remote work, competing values framework. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, this is, I'm not going to go into the details, but control and collaborate versus compete and create. So this is a little more detail. I'm going over this kind of quickly, but I want to paint a broad brush and kind of explain to you why I'm doing that. So, I don't know how many of you have read Jim Collins. He's one of the, I don't know, probably top 5 or 10 business gurus. He did Good to Great and Built to Last. But one of the phrases he uses is time tellers versus clock builders. So time teller, and basically, I think it was in Built to Last, he said that the companies that lasted were led by clock builders, not time tellers. So time tellers are visionary leadership that you need for a new wineskin. So, and part of what I feel like Jim Collins kind of misses is all new companies are founded by people who start as time tellers and they later become clock builders. So, Steve Jobs, whenever he was leading the design of a Mac, an iPod, an iPhone, an iMac, he was a time teller. Like Steve led that, and they were that good because he led it. Now, if you asked before Steve Jobs died, whenever I think it was one of his biographers asked him, what was your greatest invention? And he said it was Apple, the company. So his last design product was how do you create a system or a clock so that you can continue to innovate. And the reality is, I think you can do incremental innovations with a system. I don't know that I haven't seen an example of disruptive innovations that don't at least have someone who's kind of a visionary leader involved. So what this is, the time teller, it's an intuitive synthesis of integrated design, requires more centralized leadership, especially in fast-moving technology industries. So often, you have tech examples, you have founders of denominations and Christian movements. And then the clock builders, that's the organization and systems needed for new wineskin. And ultimately, what you're trying to do is, can leadership be decentralized as components of the clock are built to ensure that the new systems and culture are followed? So that's what we're trying to do right now in City Vision. That's going to be the 20-year project for the next 20 years of what we're going to be trying to do. Is step 1 is figure out what is the new system. Step 2 is systematize it. Does that make sense for people? Okay. So, I actually came to Jesus through the Vineyard movement, and the Vineyard movement came out of the hippie movement. and it kept trying to call itself not a denomination, but it was a denomination. But the founder of the Vineyard Movement, if I had to say what was his greatest flaw, he never set up systems. And because he didn't set up systems, after he left, the Vineyard hasn't done nearly as well as before. There's no way around systems. I mean, I like to always be, we don't need systems, that's bureaucracy, whatever. The reality is you need to have those or else it's chaos. And that's kind of what's happened to, parts of the Vineyard movement, at least, is because of that. You have to have systems and methods. And in most successful denominations and movements, the reason why they're successful is because someone set up the systems for that. Okay. I don't know if you guys have heard about the difference between simple, complicated, and complex systems. So a simple system would be like, say, a clock. I mean, a clock doesn't seem that simple, but it's not that complicated, right? Complicated systems are things that are knowable, but the domain of rocket science. So it's a solvable problem. Now, complex systems are often they're called living systems, but it's kind of like how do you change or how do you implement a policy in a society? I'll use an example. I don't know if you guys track No Child Left Behind. No Child Left Behind, every expert in the country said was going to be successful. It was successful in Texas, and it was probably the best tech innovation, or I mean, the best education innovation that happened, in the past couple decades. But once it scaled to a national level, um, the complex system reacted in ways that people couldn't predict, and No Child Left Behind. And I don't know if you guys have tracked what it was. A lot of it was national standardization of the K to 12 curriculum. It created unexpected complexities that basically caused it to fail. Most things we do are in living systems, and living systems, you can't really predict how they're going to act. One of the books that we read as a staff about a decade ago is called The Cat and the Toaster. So a toaster you can take apart, and a toaster, is simple, maybe complicated, but you can take it apart and put it back together. You can't take all the parts of a cat apart and then put it back together because taking the cat apart kills the system, right? So our design methodology, I like to say our design methodology, it's not rocket science, it's actually much harder. Rocket science can be solved with equations. This is things that can be solved with equations. This is things that there's no equations. You have to test. Does that make sense with people? So the main methodology that we use is the lean startup methodology. So you try to do a small iteration, then you test it out, you measure it, you learn, and you pivot, right? So there's a lot of things I thought were going to work and they didn't work. So a lot of what we're trying to do is to try to figure out with all these end-to-end redesign of the systems, we're trying out different things and figuring out what works. And then once we figure out what works, then we standardize it. Does that make sense? And that's how we get to what we say is half the cost, twice as relevant. We're not going to be half the cost and twice as relevant because you guys work 4 times harder. What we're essentially saying is we're going to provide 4 times the value to our average student, which I think, we're getting close to that. We're going to do it because we figure out how to optimize the end-to-end system. So we use something that's called integrated design. So let me kind of explain what that is. So Apple is probably the most famous for using integrated design. All pieces, so on a program, so this would be an academic program like a degree, all pieces of a program fit together with each other. You have a Christian worldview, our values, our students, our organizational partners, our organizational systems, the courses, all those things fit together in a really tight synergy. Why is that important? Well, Dina and Brian, as you're designing courses, you have to be thinking, and as I'm designing courses, you'll be like, why is Andrew putting all these elements about an organization into this course on counseling? I don't normally see that in a course on counseling. Well, I'm thinking about our organizational partners, right? So some of this, I'm trying to explain why things are the way they are whenever you're looking at courses. Does that make sense? Then in course design, basically there's two modes. We have interdisciplinary courses often that are solving problems of our students and partners, reflecting our values, and they include deep Christian integration. So this might be project-based courses, or course on personal health, or course on wounded healers, or course on organizational health. Some of our Christian addiction counseling courses. Um, and what we're trying to do whenever we say, okay, what's our key competitive advantage? It's twice as relevant. So if we're able to do this through integrated design, we're able to be twice as relevant to our audience. Does that make sense to people? Then we have other standardized courses, and there we want to use Legos. We want to use things out of the box. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. So our intro to accounting, we're using just pure courseware on that. There, we're trying to figure out how do we just save money by essentially buying off-the-shelf course. There doesn't need to be, we don't need to reinvent accounting. And if we did reinvent accounting, our students would probably get arrested. You can't, you have to follow that. And there's certain elements of that that's true in every field, right? So then in organizational design, part of what I've been talking with TJ a lot about, and Evan, strategic enrollment management. How do you optimize the end-to-end student experience in a way that you think about how Apple optimized the end-to-end customer experience, right? And then, how we do partnerships, how we do new student orientation, how we do admissions and financial aid. So, um, what we're trying to do with that integrated design, so bringing this back here, is we're trying to get all of this to be aligned with the context and audience so that there's higher value that's being provided at reduced cost to people. Does that make sense? So that's just tying it back to the original concept. So another way of thinking about this is integrated design at City Vision. You have to consider how each component fits optimally with other components. So if you're doing course and program design, student services, staff and faculty, how do they relate to all other components? Now, most of you are not going to be doing all this. I want you to be stretching yourself to do as much of this as you can. You may be like, Andrew, you want me to design a course and understand how it affects every aspect of the organization. That's not realistic. A lot of what we're going to be doing is I'm designing the prototype for a lot of things. And as I'm doing these prototypes, I'm keeping this in mind as I'm doing the prototype. So for Brian, you and Dina, you're looking at these addiction counseling courses. My guess is about 70% of them are pretty similar to what you're used to. 30% you're like, what is Andrew thinking? I don't understand why he does that. The reason why I'm teaching you this is if I had to take 20 faculty and I asked them all to redesign a course, the first thing they do is they rip out all the things that relate to our core values, all the things that relate to our independent design, all the things that make us unique. And I can't have that happen. Does that make sense? Because, the example I use is, you're in an apartment and you're helping, there's an apartment that was, done really well, and you go in and then you've got a bunch of rooms that were already, they didn't need to be, gutted. So that's kind of why I'm explaining this. So um there's different aspects over time that we've learned that's unique about our organizational design. So remote work is a radical shift, has major benefits and challenges. The role of faculty is very different. So we, by design, are going to be much more adjunct focused because we put a much higher premium on experience than the average university. And it's more important on the experience side than it is on reducing costs, but reducing costs is a part of it. Our course design, this integrated design, requires the highest level of expertise and contextualization. And the other thing is what we mean by student-centered is radically different from what other schools do. I haven't met a school that isn't faculty-centered. Almost every school, I can't think of a school that isn't faculty-centered. The primary source of students is partners. So whenever we're designing, I'm thinking not only of the student, but the organization. And we're countercultural with traditional higher education. But a lot of what I'm trying to explain is because we're doing this, there's a lot of aspects of the design process that's going to be more centralized. And if we don't do that, we're going to drift away from our technology value by having higher cost traditional higher education, or justice value towards majority culture, or Jesus value towards secular higher education. Um, so that's kind of what the main point of this is. Are you guys tracking with me on this? Okay, so in our Faculty 101, we have you do team profile. So everyone's been through this team profile. We don't do design, pure design. Design by itself only really works for rockets. It doesn't work for complex systems. So everything we do is design develop. This is where I live. I live here. Evan lives here. And usually, Dina, Brian, and Charlie, you guys largely live here. Um, and Kim lives here. So what does that look like in the course process? I create so any course, and I'll come back to this. So let me go. And we talked about this in we talked about this in other parts of I think Faculty 101 and 201. Um, New course design and standardized subjects can be done with develop. But if you're doing new course design for highly customized and interdisciplinary subjects, you have to think about that example of how does this course touch every other aspect of the organization. That's largely going to be me taking the lead on that. So if you look at the competencies, and I'm going to start here so you can kind of appreciate extraordinary expertise in online programming course design, expertise in faith integration, deep understanding of city visions, values, processes, tech, and context. These are all the so coming back to this, you have to understand how everything relates to everything else, which is going to explode most people's brains, and it's going to take too long. It's going to take like a decade or more to get that. So expertise in accreditation requirements and related education theory, departmental subject matter expertise. That's going to be difficult. So often I'm creating kind of our basic template that we're going to be using. Does that make sense? And then as we get to new course design and standardized subjects. So that's what I'm trying to get Dina, you and Brian to be able to do. So most of what you're going to be doing, though, is going to be the develop stable is these revisions each term. And then the stable is just where Kim's copying courses. She's not changing anything, right? Except for making sure that they're following our formatting standards. So that's kind of how this relates. Now, the other thing is each person, based on their personality type, is going to have their own sweet spot, and on where you like to live. What I need and what's going to strengthen the organization is, each person, like say you're developed stable. If at times you can adapt to the stable, and if at times you can adapt to the develop, that's going to make the team stronger because there's going to be times whenever you need to do a little bit of both. So it's hard for me to say. I mean, this is another example. This is like a 20 to 30% redesign of a course, or I'm asking you to do 20 or 30% of the design in a course. This is like a 5 to 10%, and this is like close to 0%. For any course that you might go into, say, Brian, I ask you to do a redesign on a course. There's going to be probably one or two aspects that are going to be in the develop side. There's going to be probably 5 to 8 items that are, develop stable. And then there's things that are just on the stable, like Charlie, you go in and fix quizzes and things like that. It's not like that's not that difficult. You just have to be able to look up an answer or delete it or, whatever. That's not that complicated. So that's how this relates. Now, one of the quotes that I like. So if you study instructional design, instructional design, to me, most of it is in the develop stable space. It is basically how do you follow the correct grammar and write good outcomes, the correct grammar, so to speak, of designing courses. How do you write the right type of outcomes, and then try to align things with the right type of outcomes? That's all good, but that's kind of like saying how you write a good book is you organize it into paragraphs and then you have intro statements and concluding statements, but that's not going to make, a book that's going to be a bestseller, right? So it's good to learn instructional design, but instructional design, in my opinion, is largely just here, whereas a lot of them, the bigger challenge is going to be how do you, this side is on the more creative end. So what we're trying to do over time is to get you to, I like this quote from Pablo Piasco, learn the rules like a pro so you can break them like an artist. So, and that's one of the principles of design. So what does that look like for instructional design? Learn the rules of instructional design like a pro so you can break them like an artist to create life-changing courses. So what we're seeking in our courses professionally, these are the types of quotes I'm looking for someone to say. Is you taught me exactly what I needed to learn for my job. That's the relevance quote, or I'm able to move up to the next position of what I learned. Personally, that course changed my life. And different courses are going to have different goals. Some courses, this is our goal. Other courses, this is our goal. That course was a huge part of my personal growth and recovery process. Organizationally, that course significantly expanded our organization's capacity. Our organization is healthier because of that course. And then movement level, the larger movement is thriving by retaining cutting edge innovation while keeping its values on track, partly through our courses. So as an example, and I'm not going to go into this, this is an example where we did that with our Wounded Healers course. And this is an example of how this is related to all aspects of our organization. This is tying in with our Wounded Healers program. This is tying into admissions. This is tying into student services. And each week of the course is tying into other weeks or other courses with our students. Now, the goal of this course, honestly, that course changed my life, or that course is a huge part of my personal growth and process. Is what we do. So all that's to say, integrated design means that each position and process needs to think about how it relates to other positions and processes. So that doesn't mean that you're going to all think like me. This isn't a talk like everyone needs to think like Andrew. I'm a nonlinear thinker by nature, right? So I need linear thinkers around me. So, but at the same time, we need to be able to work together. So the more you're able to shift on your team profile, the better. The second thing is City Vision does things different from other institutions. And if you don't understand that there's a good reason for things, you may just think that City Vision doesn't know what it's doing. So, and that can impact trust. Does that make sense? And then the team profile, there may be aspects of course design from the design developed that may not be obvious. So it can be helpful to focus on smaller incremental develop stable changes. So basically what I'm trying to get at, coming back to our initial analogy, often there's a lot of effort in designing the clock. And what I'm trying to do is create a system where you guys can do incremental improvements on courses 5 to 30%. One of the challenges is that the clock isn't built yet. So Charlie's gotten us to the point where more of the clock is built, but it's probably we moved from 5% of the clock being built to maybe 15%. I don't know where you think it is, Charlie, but what I'd like to do for the remaining time is give Charlie and Evan a chance to just talk about a little of how you've seen this to be true. And I know we only have a couple minutes. And Dina, I know you have probably a hard stop with counseling, so if you need to jump off, you can. But and we can talk about these things more one-to-one. But Charlie, do you want to jump in for how you've seen this to be true since you've been here?
Yeah, absolutely. When I first started several years ago to build a course, and it was nonprofit program plan, and I came at it from the point of view of working in traditional brick and mortar. Now I've also been a rescue mission chaplain, so I understood how it worked. And Andrew and I we hacked away on this thing. I thought it was pretty good, but each time I taught the course, I realized there was just something missing out of it, and it all clicked on now how far that course is off from where I really think it should be. because I didn't understand all the pieces. I didn't understand really the connection to our market. That was a huge one right there. And then making it actionable and helpful, so it really would change the organizations and the organization being better off for the student taking that course. And it was like, now I realize, holy cow, this thing is largely irrelevant for where our students are really at in their missions, running programs on a day-to-day basis of what they really need. And that just caused a lot of frustration because I really didn't understand all the pieces. There is so much stuff in Andrew's brain about how all this fits together, things he's learned over the years, that there's no way I could pick that up that quickly. And then as we went through accreditation, what I really started to internalize that I hadn't internalized before was not only are we talking about how it connects to market, how it's got these different organizational or personal impact, it's just the aspect that even within the course, I mean, there's the degree profiles, there's blooms going on, there's constructionists going on, all these layers and pieces that fit together that really to this point when I do accreditation visits also and I look at other schools, I'm thinking, holy cow, how can you even put a course out like this? It just seems totally like it's not going to help anybody because it's just all head stuff. It's all the old stuff kind of put into an online format, and it really, I think, is missing the boat on where we could really step into, as far as affordability and relevance. I mean, it's kind of what DEAC is supposed to be all about, is affordability and relevance. And I realize as I look at more schools, they're not. And so we really are doing something different. And we're kind of kicking against the pricks, so to speak, from the analogy. So yeah, it's been a busy 4 years. It's been exhausting because I'm over in a developed stable camp and trying to adapt to that has just I guess it's been a journey. And so yeah, it's been a good
Yeah.
journey. So
Yeah, and I think
all
over
right.
that time, Charlie, you've gained an understanding of why things are the way they are, that often there's good reasons that aren't as obvious. And, some of it also like that, program planning and evaluation course, you know, a lot of it you have to say, okay, is this where on the spectrum is this course? Is it 100% standardized? Is it 100% integrated? Like Wounded Healers was almost 100% integrated.
Yeah.
Um, that course was probably 30 to 40% integrated is the way it ended up. And I think that you did the like 70% the way it should have been done, right? But the integrated part wasn't, I mean, I had you do that right as you started, right? So it's too early for you to know how to and I
Right.
honestly I hadn't unpacked how do you do integrated design. So that's part of what I'm trying to do is how do you do integrated
Yeah.
design? And a lot of it also was seeing how other things are working. And, Brian, we'll want you to get to know our partners because you're,
Mm.
just like if you never met your students and you design courses, and you never interacted with the students, you probably wouldn't design very good courses because you wouldn't know whether you're fitting them. You have two audiences for these courses. You have the student and you have the organization. Um, getting to meet a good handful of organizations and understanding what are their needs on this level, that will be really helpful, as you're working on this because there's elements of these courses that I'm, pulling in based on that, and that'll help you, do better design. So, Evan, do you want to add in kind of how you've seen this to be true in kind of aspects of integrated design, um,
Yeah.
since you've been
So
here?
Charlie's spoken to some on the course level. I think then also on the program design level, I think when we especially look at the lean startup process and how things have evolved over the years based on the needs of our target audiences, you can think, for example, years ago, I was a student in what we then had as a Master's of Science in Technology and Social Entrepreneurship, which we were thinking would be a degree that would be particularly for the needs of people who wanted to use technology in primarily nonprofit social enterprises, sort of like what we have here at our organization. But there's some markets where there's a niche and it's a large enough niche that you have an addressable market there. What at least at that time we were too far ahead of the adoption curve on that, but we were able then to pivot and to adjust that. And Andrew worked with some individuals in course design, but kind of he was leading it to turn that into an MBA in that was oriented, especially a nonprofit oriented MBA, and then later expanding that also into having a master's in organizational leadership as well, that later became a master's in nonprofit management. And then ultimately, the vision that came out of that was to see that for each of the degrees that we had, stacking at the undergraduate level from the certificate to the associates to the bachelor's, to have something paralleling on the master's level so that people can continue through and have that strategic enrollment management perspective of always helping people on their side to move up in the organization and on our side to retain them so they can have more lifetime value as a student, bringing in sustainable revenue for us. And then just this past year, launching the Masters of Science in Addiction Counseling to bring that same level of increasing individuals' capacity and organizational capacity to the addiction counseling field that we already had on the nonprofit side.
Yeah. So with that master's in addiction counseling launching, there are certain design assumptions and they may or may not play out after we've, scaled it. Like I think we probably still need a couple more years to scale it because right now we're, you know, kind of in soft launch stage where I could have spent, $20,000 doing marketing and advertising to try to get double the number of students in it. But I'd rather actually work on refining the courses with a smaller number of students and then, scale it from that. Is kind of the process that we're in. But we may find that some of the design assumptions are wrong. Like one of the big unknowns, we wanted to get Liberty to guarantee acceptance of transfer credit, but their lawyers wouldn't let them do that. So until we get the first student to transfer, we won't know. If for some reason they don't accept that transfer credit, that's going to change that path, right? And we'll have to figure out how do we, work with that student on that path. Now, there's probably other schools we could potentially work with besides just Liberty on that, using it as a pre-LPC track. So that's a design assumption, right? So yeah, so there's a lot of things that are like that. But Brian, I know this is a lot to take in, and often whenever I teach, people accuse me of it's like drinking from a fire hose, and there's a lot here. And
This
this
big around.
is not just a fire hose; it's a complex fire hose, right? But
It's a Hydra,
yeah. So,
Hydra hose.
do you have any thoughts or questions on this?
No, not at this time. But even if it's a fire hose, yeah, I want to say it is clicking. A lot of what was said in this meeting is a lot of the stuff that I've either already heard in previous videos that I've just been reviewing and going over, or a lot of the stuff is just consistent with what Andrew has already been giving me to read and review and stuff that's part of my becoming more familiar with my role and also the addiction counseling program. So just like how the programs are kind of like Legos and they stack on each other, I think it's clicking slowly but surely. It's clicking.
Yeah.
So I'm not being inundated too much at this time,
Okay.
but yeah.
All right. Yeah, good. Yeah. Coming to City Vision, you have the advantage of just being on the ground floor at a smaller Christian higher education institution. And I know that you appreciate that, around counseling and addiction counseling. So that is an opportunity. But I think so that's just the Jesus side of our values. But then there's, the justice, which you can appreciate, we're doing addiction counseling, the focus, the kind of laser focus on addiction counseling. But then I think the other part that you're getting in this talk is I used to do .com startups before this, right? So there's a certain amount of that's our core competency of like it's what I'm good at, and I'm trying to propagate that into City Vision, like this re-engineering a system to get better efficiencies. And, that's something that you're not going to get in very many places. That may or may not be of interest to you, but
No, I really
you're
admire your
getting a little bit of
dedication to
a,
quality over quantity.
yeah, you're getting a little bit of a, .com startup. Now, I think over the next, 20 or 30 years, these models that re-engineer the whole higher education experience end to end are going to be the dominant models. Because just like with SpaceX, Boeing's not doing very well. I mean, Boeing's not doing very well at all, but their rockets are not doing very well compared to SpaceX because SpaceX is now 10 times cheaper than their rockets. That's what's going to happen over time with higher education. There's those that just basically said we're going to do the old way online, and then there's those that are kind of reinventing the system. And the people who kind of reinvent the system in the next, few decades, it's not going to be competitive, with the old people now. So yeah, so that's a quick summary. Now, what I'm going to try to do over the next 6 months or so, I'm going to try to unpack a lot more of the details, so that, part of my goal is to take, people who are developed stable and to move them a little bit over to the left to the develop side. But that's a huge amount of work. And it's the difference between you being able to do 5% modifications to courses without, you know, removing key parts of our values, is what happens, to being able to, do 20, 30% modifications and instilling parts of our values, especially in the undergraduate addiction counseling courses. Some of those courses need help. And it would be great if you could, like, I feel like we're implementing these practices in how you're seeing the graduate courses designed. We need to retrofit a lot of those best practices into our undergraduate courses. So I think that's where there could be a big opportunity for you. So
Yeah.
does that make
And
sense?
to make them also, consistent so they gel well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And TJ, for you, I mean, a lot of this is just how does that relate back to student services? But also as you kind of grow into more academic role, it helps you kind of think about, okay, how are things designed? Does that make sense? But there's a lot, I'm always thinking about student services on key courses. Like a lot of our 100 level courses, I have put in student service like hooks, like let's, identify someone who could be a mentor at my organization. Let's identify someone who could be a case manager contact for the wounded healers. Like those are all student services hooks that I'm doing integrated design in courses. Now, what's missing is I'm designing that, but I haven't yet fully designed the processes on the student services side to take advantage of that. And that's part of what we need to do, to improve that. So, next time you're contacting a student, you understand why that thing was designed that way. Like we're asking all these students to, list a contact in their organization. We're not really using it that much. We should be, and we haven't designed the components of the systems or the clocks or the procedures where, okay, you call the student first, and after that you call their, mentor in their organization. And we haven't designed those procedures. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. All right. And Charlie, the biggest thing that's driving why am I doing this? I know the thing that you care about, you're in transition and you want to see the transition go well, and you also want to, the things that are transitioning to get transitioned, right? So, but there's not an easy solution on a lot of those things. It's, like I got to train a bunch of people for that. So that's essentially what I'm trying to do. So, yeah. Okay. I think that's it. I'm going to stop